From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast.
Performance that we often failed to consider when making agronomic recommendations and thinking about how we managed our plants and crops. So the first piece that I learned was that it is possible for us to grow plants that are resistant to diseases and insects. And I can say with confidence, virtually 100% resistant to all diseases and all insects, even those which are considered to be uncurable using conventional chemistry. And I can say that coming from a space of having had a lot of experience and having had a lot of success in the field of actually accomplishing and achieving those results. The second piece that I learned is that when we grow plants that have this extraordinary level of immunity, not only are they resistant to diseases and insects, but they also have the capacity to transfer that immunity to the people who consume that food. And that we can truly have a legitimate conversation about growing food as medicine. And the third piece was this realization that so there has been, within the area of, particularly in the area of biological and organic agriculture, when we talk about growing really healthy plants, the common idea is that if we want to produce really healthy plants, then we need to have really healthy soil. And that is true. But then the question becomes, well, how do you produce really healthy soil? And here I think we have fundamentally missed one of our greatest opportunities, which is that the fastest way to regenerate soil health and to produce extraordinarily quality soil and organic matter microbial activity is by growing really healthy plants. So I personally became very passionate about the potential that I saw in agriculture when I realized that by managing plant nutrition, by managing the way that we were growing our crops, we could produce plants that were resistant to diseases and insects. We're producing food as medicine and could actually regenerate soil health all at the same time. That combination provides the foundation to address and resolve many of the challenges that we face in the world today with increasing carbon dioxide concentrations in the air, climate change that is happening, and the need to produce a greater volume of food in the future and healthier, higher quality food. And in addition to all of these pieces from a global perspective, we also have the opportunity to really be doctors, because we really are the doctors. As food producers, we have the capacity to produce crops that actually can, and a quality and vitality of food that actually can prevent illness. And we see today we have particularly here in developed society in North America, we have an epidemic of degenerative disease with diabetes, stroke, heart disease, etc. And we have the capacity and the potential as farmers to actually have a very substantial impact on the quality of the food that people eat and make a difference in that perspective. So I made it my personal mission. I wanted, as I learned about these different pieces, I wanted to share this information and make sure that everyone knew about the opportunity and the potential of truly regenerative agriculture ecosystems. So today, there has been a tremendous amount of discussion about sustainability in agriculture. And I often ask the question, what is it that we are trying to sustain? What do we really want to sustain? From my perspective, we should have no desire to sustain the level of crop performance that we are at today. We first need to have a conversation about a regenerative model of agriculture where we are constantly improving plant health and improving soil health and get to a much higher plateau of performance. And then, once we are at a much higher plateau of performance where we actually have disease and insect resistance and high-quality plants, at that point, and only at that point, can we have a conversation about true sustainability. According to the USDA, in the United States, there are 69,335 fruit and vegetable growers as of 2015 census. Of those, 6,223 have greater than $500,000 in annual revenue and produce 90% of the fresh fruit and vegetable supply in the United States. That's 6,000 growers. That's a very small number. I realized that if I truly believe and want to have an impact on the quality of the food that people are growing, I want to work with those 6,000 growers. Those are the people that I want to work with to really make a difference and to help change the quality of the food supply that all of us are consuming. So I also realized that when speaking with these growers, I will not even be successful in getting off home plate, figuratively speaking, when we have a conversation about producing disease and insect-resistant plants. They don't care about growing disease and insect-resistant plants. They don't care about growing food as medicine. They don't care about regenerating soil health. It feels good. It's something that is inspiring, and it is idealistic, and it's something that they would wish to do and desire to do, but it's not going to be enough to change behavior. If we really want to change the way people are growing, then I believe very strongly that we achieve what we incentivize. We need to give growers an incentive to change and to produce a healthier, higher quality crop. So based on that thought frame, when I started paying very close attention to the economic results that we were producing on the farms that we were working with and the growers that we were working with on a broad variety of different crops, and I became obsessed with the idea that every single time when we start working with a grower at Advancing Eco-Agriculture, we need to make sure that every single recommendation that we make, if it's for something as simple as a single foliar application or if it's a recommendation for a program for the entire growing season, we need to make sure that that grower produces and experiences a very strong economic benefit from using a different nutritional model than what he has been using in the past. So, using that framework, we have our target when we start working with a grower is for every nutritional application, everything that a grower does, our target is a minimum of a 3x return. We want to see that if they apply $100 per acre of plant nutrition products or $1,000 per acre of plant nutrition products, we need to see a return that is at least 3 times greater than that. So that's our goal. That's what we're working towards. So within this context, over the last 10 years, 11 years, since we've started working with many of these growers from all over the world, particularly on the West Coast, we've gone through this exercise every year at the end of the growing season, latter part of the year in late October, early November. We would rank the success of all the growers that we were working with based on our own evaluation on a scale of 1 to 10. Not based on the farmer's evaluation, because what we observed is that many of the farmers who were the most successful, who were having the greatest level of success, were not satisfied with where they were. They were never satisfied. They always wanted to do better. And then there were many growers who still had a lot of opportunity left on the table who were very comfortable where they were. So we started grouping all of our growers together and ranking them based on how much opportunity we believed they had left on the table on a scale of 1 to 10. And then we started grouping the 1s and 2s together and grouping the 9s and 10s together and asking the question, what are the similarities within each of these groups? What are the commonalities between all these growers? And then, what are the substantial differences in the growers between the two groups? And what are the similarities? And over the years, the first number of years that we did this exercise, we learned a lot about agronomy. We learned a lot about plant nutrition. We learned a lot about the agronomic practices that really separated successful growers from the growers who were not having the same degree of success. But then the picture changed, and it was no longer about agronomy. Now it was about management. And over the years, we've been able to identify a set of 16 very specific characteristics and decision-making processes that are distinctly different from the farm managers who are experiencing exceptional levels of success and farm managers who are not experiencing the same degree of success. So I wanted to provide a kind of a high-level overview of some of the things that we've learned and experienced. So this was my transport down here this morning. Not. Yeah, it was a really smooth ride. So this First is a framework, a decision-making framework that is used in systems analysis thinking. Actually, I've adapted this idea and this thought model from manufacturing, systems manufacturing, lean manufacturing processes. So the idea that there are 3 different management frameworks. The first one, all the way on the left, is when a farm manager is reacting to things as they happen. So we're always reacting to things that have already happened. So once we see that we have a disease or once we see we have a pest problem in the field, then we go do something about it. And we only notice it, we only get notified, we only get an alert once we have already had a failure. And in this case, when we've already had a failure, stuff has already happened, now we are completely dependent on rescue treatment. We can only treat what has already happened, and we need to rescue the situation. This is the framework in which we are largely dependent on synthetic pesticide applications and very strong control methods. So there are only a handful of organic/biological controls that fit into the reactive management spectrum. Then the second level of management is when growers begin managing much more proactively. So this is when we are engaged in very intense crop scouting, and we begin to see diseases and insects just before they become a really serious problem, or right at the point when they start becoming a serious problem. And it gives us the opportunity to do some early prevention. So and this is also the framework in which we can start using biocontrol agents to try to prevent problems from happening. So biocontrols, examples of biocontrols would be using materials such as beneficial insects, for example. Beneficial insects or predatory wasps or whatever the case might be take some time to build up a population and to begin to really having an impact. And this is the framework, this is the context within which most of organic and biological agriculture has framed its management ideology. But there is another level past this, which is predictive management. So predictive management seeks to identify trends in the future and predict the point of failure, predict disease susceptibility, predict insect susceptibility weeks or months before it actually happens. And then once we really understand why we are having a crash in the system, when we really, truly, deeply understand that now also gives us the opportunity to prevent the root cause. Prevent the root cause of the problem before it ever has the chance to express itself. And this is the place where we can use nutritional management and biostimulants to stimulate plant health to a point where we no longer have problems.
Hey everyone, hope your summer is going well. Just wanted to update you on some events that we have for the end of summer here in the fall. August 6th, we'll be in Oklahoma for an organic transition field day at Acadian Family Farm. That's a free event. August 19th through the 20th, we'll be in Spring Green at Gary Zimmer's farm, and that'll be a event hosted with Gary and Savannah Institute talking about installing perennial crops into cropping systems and grazing systems. And Gary Zimmer will be a speaker there, Mark Shepard, and then some folks from Savannah Institute. September 10th, we'll be in North Dakota, which is again another free organic success field day at Minokin Farm with Jay Fear. And then September 12th through the 14th in Viroqua, Wisconsin, we're going to have a water earthwork live harvest demonstration and intensive workshop with Mark Shepard and his RAD team. So if you ever wanted to see how to put swales, berms, and water systems in and learn from Mark for 3 days, that'll be a very good, highly intensive event. And it'll be probably a little bit smaller group. So these are hands-on gatherings designed for you guys who want to build healthier soils, stronger businesses, and lasting resilience. And I also want to mention before I wrap it up here, we have our 50th annual EcoAg Conference this December 1st through the 4th in Madison, Wisconsin. And we are bringing a giant lineup again with people like Joel Salatin, Gabe Brown, Rick Clark, John Kempf, Will Harris, Neil Kinsey, and many more premier regenerative agriculture speakers, and I think it's going to be one of the best events ever put on in the regenerative agriculture space. So, go ahead and check out more, register for our events. You can head to acresusa.com/events, and you'll see everything there.
So, examples of this thought process, or this type of management system would be using materials such as immune-triggering microbes. For example, one of the tools that we use a lot is a microbial inoculant called Spectrum, which contains a number of different species of plant growth-promoting rhizobacteria, PGPRs. And these PGPRs, when they are in the plant root system, trigger an immune response in the SAR pathway, systemic acquired resistance. So just having the presence of these bacteria in the root system triggers an immune reaction. It is the equivalent of giving a plant a vaccination. So the plant's immune system is constantly being turned on, which makes it much more resistant to a broad range of diseases and much more resistant to a broad range of insect pests. So those are the types of tools. When we talk about biostimulants, these are biostimulants that work with soil biology and work with plants to produce a much higher performance of plant health that we can use to prevent the root cause of problems weeks or months in advance. So what we observed, a very distinct pattern, is that the most successful farm managers focus and spend as much of their time and energy, their personal time and energy, focusing on what they can do to prevent the root cause of the problem, all the way on the right-hand side of the spectrum. Then we observed another really substantial difference, and this one was perhaps the most distinct. The single biggest difference between the growers who were experiencing the highest level of success and those who were not experiencing the same degree of success was how they thought about money, how they approached money and financial management on the farm. So I have a question for you, each of you as a grower. How do you make money? The answer cannot be yield. It's not about yield. How do you really make money? If you're growing cherries, you don't make money with 20 tons per acre of soft, small-sized cherries that go for processing. But you can make money with 8 tons per acre of cherries that are large and firm and qualify for export. So in the case of cherry production, the way you make money is with size and firmness, not yield. The same holds true for a broad range of fruit and vegetable crops, but it also holds true for broadacre production crops. When we talk about wheat production, if you want to be substantially more profitable with producing wheat, it's not about producing 10% or 20% more bushels per acre. It's about producing high protein content wheat. When you're producing grain, it's about test weight, protein content, fat content. You need to ask yourself the question, as a biological organic grower, what is it that you really are getting paid for and are getting compensated for? And if you're not growing a crop that has any quality components at all, then perhaps you need to think about growing a different type of crop. But what we realized is the growers who think deeply about this question and pay a lot of attention to this question for every crop. There are some crops for which the answer really is about the quantity of marketable fruit that is taken off the field. There's not a lot of quality variables. So in that case, the way you make more money than the other growers that you're competing with is by paying attention to the number of fruit per plant. How many plants do you have per square foot? What's the number of fruit per plant? What's the bud initiation? You begin understanding the process within the plant that really significantly impact to the yield of that specific crop. If you're growing almonds, for example, we know that a single almond tree will set as many as 4,000 to 5,000 blossoms, but it'll only finish 400 to 500 fruit and nuts. So what's the difference? Where does the difference come from? The difference comes from we have successful blossoming and pollination. Usually, most of the time we have good pollination. And following good pollination, the fruit starts sizing and filling, and then we have what is called a June drop. And in June, the tree drops 80 to 90% of the fruit and the nuts. Why? So the most successful almond growers obsess about understanding why. They study that particular segment of plant health and plant development to an exceptional degree, and they do not delegate that responsibility to anyone else. So within any farm management system. So another aspect of the way the most successful managers think about money is when you think about the balance sheet and profitability, you can increase profitability by either one of two ways, either by increasing revenue or by reducing costs. And for farmers, of course, in our entire industry is an industry that is based on very low margins and making sure that we optimize what is happening at every step along the way. But we found that there was a radical difference between how the most successful growers focused on revenue versus costs as compared to the rest. And the difference was that the most, in terms of their own, the most successful growers spent 80% of the total time that they spent thinking about financial management, their own personal time, they spent 80% of that time thinking about how to increase revenue and 20% of their time thinking about how to reduce costs. This was the exact polar opposite of what most farm managers were doing, where in terms of their personal energy, they were spending 80% of their time thinking about how to reduce costs and 20% on how to increase revenue. And this goes back to what I was describing just a moment ago. Every farmer, farm manager, works with a team of people, of advisors, of people who support him on his farm, whether they are veterinarians, dairy nutritionists, agronomists, horticulturists, geneticists, whoever the case might be. He works with a team of people who advise him and that he depends on to help him make decisions for his farming operation. And that team includes an accountant. The most successful farm managers delegate a lot on the cost side to their accountants, and they personally focus on the revenue side. They think all the time, they study the plant physiological processes and try to understand how can we increase revenue. That piece they do not delegate to anyone on their team. They do not delegate. Once they really understand how they can increase revenue and make more money, they do not delegate that piece to an agronomist or a geneticist or an advisor. They do that piece personally, and they spend a lot of time studying that and thinking about it. So when we think about reducing costs, we can reduce costs in several different areas by using less expensive genetics, inputs, and also we can reduce costs by, this is a very important piece, and I should also mention that the most successful farm managers do not focus on, they don't ignore the cost side. I'm not suggesting that they focus exclusively on revenue and ignore costs. They are still very responsible managers, and they still pay a lot of attention to the cost side. But when they do try to manage costs, they do so using manageable data. And when I say manageable data, I am talking about data that can actually be used to make management decisions. For the last half a dozen years, all of the latest and greatest toys for farmers have been drones and drone imagery. Everyone wanted to have a drone to see what was happening, what was going on their farm. So farmers started using drones and collecting all these really great images about what was happening, what was going on in their fields. And almost universally, we see growers use it for a year, maybe two, and then they stop. Why? Because they can't use the data to make decisions. They say, I've got some really great pictures, now what do I do with it? They can't really do anything with the data that they got from the drone imagery, for the most part. So the most successful growers focus only on getting data which actually gives them the opportunity to make better management decisions, and specifically, again, focusing, really understanding the nexus point. So I'm going to use cherries as an example because they're an example that we have worked with quite a bit and I understand very well. So the key to producing cherry size and firmness is understanding what happens in the 2 weeks after pollination. So within the 2 weeks after pollination, the embryo is experiencing the cell division versus cell expansion stage. And growers, the most successful growers, want to study and understand what is happening in the cherry fruit at that point very intensely. And they want to have data to understand what is happening at that point. So understanding what is happening, doing a tissue analysis or a soil analysis and looking what is happening in your crop in August doesn't help you make management decisions when you really need to know what is happening in May. So they focus very intensely on getting data to help them support the decision-making process at these critical nexus points that really influence revenue and profitability. So when you focus on increasing revenue, you can increase revenue. This is a very quick summary list that I put together. This will be different for every crop, and I'm sure you can figure out what it is for your crops. You can increase yields by focusing on, for each individual plant, increasing the number of fruit, increasing the size of that fruit, or increasing fruit weight, whether we're talking about test weights on grain, fruit size, or whatever the case might be. And then on the other side, looking at quality. When you want to increase quality, you can look at improving fruit firmness, flavor, storability, shelf life, test weight, protein content, fat content. These are all different pieces that contribute to quality that even though as growers, if we may not be directly paid for it, in many cases we are still indirectly paid for it because it does contribute to increased overall yield. An additional piece that really defines the exceptionally successful farm managers is they focus and spend a lot of time thinking about how they can build resilience into their farming operations. So if they're growing tree fruit, they think about how they can build in climate resilience and give those trees just a few additional degrees of frost protection and freezing resistance by how they manage nutrition, making them more resilient to drought and to flooding stress, etc. The most exceptional farm managers expect to have perfect implementation and execution from themselves and from their employees. Anything less than the best is not acceptable. When they plan for pruning or cultivation or irrigation or foliar application, the only excuse for when it cannot happen in the time frame in which it's supposed to happen is weather. That's the only excuse. And then it should only be delayed by a matter of days or, depending on the operation, a few weeks.
Hey, eco-farmers. This is Taylor Henry with Acres USA. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy interviewing these folks. If you're serious about regenerative agriculture, I've got an incredible resource you need to check out, the Acres USA membership. You farm in the physical world, and you deserve a physical printed magazine to match. Since 1971, Acres USA magazine has been the leading voice in ecological agriculture, delivering the best insights from regenerative farmers, agronomists, and researchers to help you farm profitably without toxic chemicals. Our membership included physical and digital copies of the magazine each month of the year, which has always been a standard for Acres USA, but we wanted to over-deliver on content. When I acquired this business, I was happy to find that we had years of audio files from presentations at our annual EcoAg conference. And guess what? They were hiding. Well, not anymore. We developed this membership portal that gives you access to the recordings from farmers like Gabe Brown, Gary Zimmer, Joel Salatin, and Mark Shepard. We also include recordings of private events. Finally, if you are like me and you like listening to content, we are now producing a membership-only podcast of each issue of the magazine, so you can consume each article while you're out in the field. To make things even sweeter, you'll get discounts on books, workshops, and events to keep expanding your knowledge. So are you ready to take your farming to the next level? Join today for a ridiculously low price at eco-farming.com or see details in the notes.
These growers make sure, I mentioned this earlier, they do not delegate understanding what is happening at these critical points of influence. Acquiring manageable data. Another interesting aspect that we identified was that these most successful farm managers consistently spend 5 to 10% of their personal time learning, and specifically, again, learning about these particular points which help their crops be the most profitable. And they all employed very imaginative thinking. They tended to be early adopters. They were very comfortable trying new things, trying new ideas, and just because someone else had not done it before that they were aware of did not mean that they were uncomfortable trying it on their own. And I've heard this phrase, which has given me a lot to think about sometimes. There's a comment, and this actually came from farmers in the Midwest. One farmer made the comment one time he didn't know. He said, many farmers are open to progress, but they're resistant to change. So they want the progress to happen outside of themselves. Well, guess what? It doesn't work that way. If you really want to see change happen and to have I believe that when you have the greatest level of fun and enjoyment on your farm is when you are trying new things, and when you're really playing. You're trying out new ideas, you're testing new ideas, and working to see what really works for you. And then these early adopters also, we hear this mantra a lot. Think big, start small, scale fast. Run a small trial, see what works, and if it works, don't hesitate to scale it up. Move very quickly. In order to do that, if you want to do that, I can tell you this is a big challenge that we see with many farm managers, is if you want to start small and then scale quickly, that means you have to measure. You have to measure whether your trial actually worked. It's not good enough to eyeball the gravity wagon and say, oh yeah, I think it looks like it was about the same amount of corn on the test plot versus the treated acre. That's not good enough. You need to actually measure. You need to have actually know what happened, and then when you know what happened, you now have the background to say, okay, we can scale this, and we can apply it on a much broader area because we know it actually works. There was another interesting aspect as well. So in animal agriculture, we understand that the most successful farm managers who are producing livestock have some type of connection with the animals that they're working with. So for a dairy farmer, for example, you can have a dairy farmer that walks down the dairy barn early in the morning, as soon as he gets out to the barn, behind 2 lines of cows, and he will say, there is something wrong with that cow. And yet, there is absolutely no visual indicator to see that something is wrong. It's purely a gut response, a gut reaction that comes from knowing his cows and having a close connection to what is happening in the barn. That same mentality, that same process also happens for the most successful crop growers. Any number of times, we've been walking through an orchard, walking through a vegetable field, and a grower might say something such as, there's something wrong with this block of fruit. I don't know what's going on. I can't really tell you what it is, but something is not right. It is those growers who actively cultivate that sense, who actively try to tap in and to understand intuitively what is happening, what is going on in the field, who consistently produce exceptional yield responses and crop responses in the field. We also noticed that these really successful growers have exceptional employee relationships, and that people don't just work for them for the money. They will put in blood and sweat and tears to make sure that they go above and beyond during all the crisis situations to make sure that everything happens and is executed on the farm as it needs to happen. And finally, a very important piece, these farmers acknowledge and recognize the internal dissonance that many of us experience as farmers and try to work to resolve it. So what is the internal dissonance? The internal dissonance is a concept, an idea that I came up with to describe this, the substantial difference between the ideals that many of us hold in our heart versus the actions that we actually take every day. So let me give you an example of this. We currently work with a sweet corn grower his family has been growing sweet corn for the same customer for the last 5 generations, and he knows that all the sweet corn that they are producing is going to feed children. And he is very passionate. It's very important to him personally that they are growing sweet corn for children. This sweet corn needs to be safe. It needs to be high quality. It needs to be free of all pathogens. This is something that means a lot to him. If I were to introduce any one of you in this room to this grower, the importance of growing high-quality, safe sweet corn for children would come up in the first 5 minutes of the conversation. Guaranteed. So that's on one hand. That is the ideal that this grower strives to uphold. And on the other hand, they spray, there's zero tolerance for corn earworm. So they spray the sweet corn with toxic pesticides every 48 hours during the silking period. That is the internal dissonance. That is the difference between the ideals that we hold and the actions that we feel we don't have any options to take. So I'm not suggesting that you need to go home and stop doing all those things that are in conflict with your ideals. But the most successful growers recognize it. They realize, they bring it from the subconscious into the conscious mind, and they begin thinking about what steps they can take to bring those two pieces together so that there no longer is this internal subconscious dissatisfaction that is happening. So I'd like to give you a quick example of a farm that we worked with this past growing season for the first time. This was Simonian Fruit in California. Started working with them in December of last year on their nectarine crop. So prior to this, we had no experience working with, or no substantial experience working with nectarines, a few acres here and there. But here we're working with total 1,500 acres of tree fruit. We started working with the early crop of nectarines with 350 acres when we first started working with them. And so when we first start working with a grower, we start by asking the question, how do you make money with this crop? We didn't know what the answer was to that question for nectarines. And so for nectarines, the answer to that question was size. They know that they hand prune the number of fruit. They know that every tree is going to have 900 fruit, or plus or minus 10%, not even 10%, plus or minus about 5%. They know that every single tree is going to have 900 fruit per tree. And so when they pack nectarines, they can pack them, they have the exact same size case, and they can have 72s, where it's 72 count per case, 56s, 64s. There's a number of different case count sizes. And the difference in price is that a case of nectarines that is at 56s is $24 per case, wholesale price. A case of 72s is $12 per case. It's double the price. And so if you think about it, if you have 72 cases, you're getting many fewer cases per tree, and you're also getting less money per case. So when you combine those, you compound that, you get this tremendous profit difference between the trees that are producing larger fruit and the trees that are producing smaller fruit. So when we started working with them, I can't keep myself from going off on a little bit of a tangent here. So we have within the area of biological and and organic agriculture, we have a problem. The problem is that we accuse conventional agriculture of being dogmatic and having a lot of dogmas saying, oh, we have to use pesticides, we have to do it this way, we have to do it that way, and not being open to new ideas. And at the same time, we collectively have become very dogmatic about our ideology of how we should approach growing really healthy plants. So we've become very dogmatic that we need to use tissue analysis, or we need to use soil analysis with the Albrecht system and make sure that we have 70% base saturation. Producing a soil that is balanced, a nice, healthy, balanced soil is the most important thing that we can do. That's wrong. Our priority, we only have one objective and one goal, and that is to grow the healthiest, highest quality crop possible. Right now, the first year, the first growing season. When we work with growers, our goal is to get a response immediately. It's not, in my opinion, from my perspective, it is not correct for us to think that, oh, we need to start working with limestone applications and soil amendment applications with the goal of producing a crop response 2 or 3 years down the road. We are never going to be successful at getting farmers to have a desire to implement biological and organic agricultural systems if that is the approach we take. We need to have the mind frame that our goal is to produce a healthy crop immediately. And for far too many growers and for far too many agronomists, our goal has become to make a nicely balanced soil report from the laboratory. That's a problem. Soil analysis and sap analysis and tissue analysis are tools to help us get to our goal faster. They cannot be the goal themselves. Even with sap analysis, we've pioneered and developed the use of sap analysis. It's something that we work with on all of the growers that we work with. But sap analysis, we don't have the goal of saying, oh, we want all the minerals in the sap analysis to be perfectly balanced. That's not the objective. The objective is to grow a really healthy crop. And the sap analysis is a tool to help us reach that objective. I think this is a very important piece that I wanted to mention because it's a tremendous opportunity for us as organic and biological growers to let me give you a more concrete example. So occasionally growers run soil analysis with a variety of different laboratories, and they get these recommendations, and then they come talk to us and they say, okay, my recommendations say I have low soil calcium levels, and I'm very low in manganese, and I'm low in sulfur, and I've got these recommendations for 2 tons per acre of limestone and 40 pounds of manganese sulfate and 150 pounds of elemental sulfur. Now, the person or the program which wrote those recommendations only in the context of trying to balance that soil test with absolutely no consideration for the crop. You have to take the crop into consideration. So I would never dream of making that type of a recommendation for a grower that, particularly for a grower that has constrained economic resources. What you need to do in this context is, okay, this crop, we have soil that doesn't have enough calcium and manganese and sulfur. So let's find a way that we can, our most inexpensive option to supply enough calcium and magnesium and sulfur for this year or for the next 2 years. Instead of putting on 2 tons per acre of limestone, let's put on 400 or 500 pounds of very fine grind limestone that has a very rapid availability. And let's produce a flush of a very rapid calcium response for this crop, this growing season. And then when we produce a really great crop, now we are going to have a better financial base to work from, a better economic base to work from, that we can justify to make more soil amendment applications in the future. But let's not start there. That's not step one. Step one should not be to spend $500 or $1,000 per acre on soil amendments. That's not the first priority. The first priority is to figure out what we need to apply to produce the greatest crop response. So, I'm done ranting now. So when we look at, coming back to the nectarines, so the first thing that we looked at was, okay, now we understand that our objective is size. We want to have the largest size nectarines possible. And so the question of size happens about 10 to 14, within a 2-week window after blossoming and pollination. So we started with, we pulled soil analysis, we pulled irrigation water analysis, we knew what was happening with soil profile, but we didn't have time or resources. This was actually a farm that had major financial constraints, and we did not have the financial resources to work with any soil amendments or to work on changing water quality, even though that was very urgently necessary. Instead, we focused on foliar applications of nutrients right at the blossoming and pollination period to try to influence fruit size. And then we applied 3 additional. So altogether we did a total of 4 foliar applications. We did 1 right at blossoming and pollination, followed by 3 later on during the fruit fill period to really increase photosynthesis, make sure that the trees produce large volumes of sugar and transfer a lot of sugar into the fruit.
Hey there. Did you attend our EcoAg conference this year in Madison, Wisconsin? Well, if you didn't, or if you did, we've got the recordings now available. Get on-demand access to every session with the EcoAg recordings. Learn directly from the pioneers of soil health, livestock integration, and profitable regenerative systems, all at your own pace. Speakers include Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, John Kempf, Joel Salatin, and a lot more. We also have additional products that include the full-day workshops done by Matt Powers, John Kempf, Nigel Palmer, Jordan Green, Mark Shepard, and Austin Unruh. These workshops are in depth and will help you dig deep on the presenters' topics. Grab your recordings now at conference.eco-ag.com/24 recordings or find the link in the notes. Because the best investment you can make is in your own knowledge. Now back to the show.
Also, so when we asked Jimmy the question of where can we increase profit, we got 3 answers: improving the grade, improving fruit size and fruit uniformity, and reducing the number of defective fruit, the culls that were graded out of the system. So this is the data from what happened on the first 6 varieties of nectarines that they harvested in terms of yield increases. So on 2 of the fields, we actually got less yield. And so these numbers are all treated versus untreated, side-by-side comparisons in the same blocks, the same variety, the same block, 6 different blocks that we split. And it's split applications side-by-side. So if you notice, 2 of these fields, we got a substantial yield reduction, one of them about 12%, one of them about 19%, if I recall correctly. And the other 4, we got a very nice yield response. This is Jimmy Simonian and Jason Hobson out in the orchard. So we saw the largest yield increase in the highest price number 1 fruit, all the way from a low of, I think, about 14% up to about a 54% increase in that specific grade. So number 1 fruit that did not need to be thrown out. When you combined the higher grade plus the yield increase, you have this compounded effect in the orchard. That resulted in a net increase in revenue. One field went backwards by 6%, the one that had the big yield drop, and actually the big yield drop was due to over pruning and reducing the number of fruit on the tree. But even with that as an aside, overall, we averaged a yield improvement of greater than 20%. So, sorry, not a yield improvement, but a profitability improvement, a total profit improvement of greater than 20%. So how many of you would like to have 20% more profit on your crops that you're growing? That's a really, really big deal. That's a really big deal. Now, I'm using nectarines as an example, but I'd like to, from our experience, this is equally possible and equally true if you're working with soybeans, if you're working with corn, if you're working with rice or wheat or any of these commodity crops. When you begin really asking the question, where do I make money with this crop? And you begin focusing on really understanding that piece and managing plant nutrition to optimize that piece, we consistently see 10, 15, 20, 30% improvements in profitability within a year to 2 years at the most on almost any crop. It happens repeatedly over and over again. So, an additional element was that the off-grade fruit. So notice how we had the substantial increase in the actual on-grade fruit. The off-grade fruit that was below grade, the single biggest problem in 2017 was that they couldn't harvest fast enough. They had labor shortages. They weren't able to harvest quickly enough. And they actually had to grade out fruit because it was overripe and because it was soft. So it was not because it was small, not because it was defective, but actually because it was overripe. All right. I'm just going to, I don't like these data slides. I'm going to move through this. So the question now becomes, what I'd like to focus the last few minutes on is, how can you do this on your farm? How can you achieve these types of results with your operation? And if I had to summarize it all down into a few bullet points, I would say, number 1 is you need to understand for the crop that you're growing exactly what the point is that you can have the greatest impact on yield and quality that you can actually be compensated for. So you need to identify that. That's step 1. Step 2 is to increase photosynthesis of that plant to produce a tremendous volume of sugar at that specific stage of development. So over the last 10 years, I've produced a number of diagrams to describe and explain some of the things that we see happening in plants as we start working with plant health. One of these diagrams is that I've produced, one of the first ones that I produced was what we term the plant health pyramid. How many of you in here have heard me talk about the plant health pyramid before? Okay, only a few of you. So this is a very powerful diagram that I could literally talk about for 4 hours. There's a tremendous amount of science behind it. But just to give you a very quick summary of the plant health pyramid, as we worked with many different growers in different environments, different types of crops, we've observed this gradual evolution of plant health, where plants become resistant to different types of diseases and different types of insects at different stages of physiological performance. So the first level, at the bottom of the pyramid, is when plants begin photosynthesizing really well. And just to give you a little bit of context, what we've come to accept as normal and common is plants that are photosynthesizing somewhere in the neighborhood of about 15 to 20% of their inherent genetic capacity. For almost any crop, we find that we can increase the photosynthetic volume of the total quantity of sugars produced in every 24-hour photo period by a factor of about 4 to 5 times. So there's two things that happen at level 1 of the pyramid when we have good photosynthesis. First, there's an increase in the volume, the quantity of sugar that is produced in every 24-hour photo period. And the second piece that happens is that we get better formation of complex, complete carbohydrates. We no longer have soluble sugars or monosaccharides in the plant sap. As soon as that happens, these plants now become very resistant to all of the soil-borne fungal pathogens, so Rhizoctonia, Pythium, Verticillium, Fusarium, and so forth. The second level is when plants begin producing complete proteins. And we have true protein synthesis. So now we no longer have high levels of soluble nitrates and amino acids and ammonium in the plant sap. And at this point, these plants become very resistant to all the insects which have simple digestive systems, so sucking and chewing insects such as aphids, whiteflies, alfalfa weevils, leafhoppers, all the larval insects such as cabbage looper, corn earworm, corn borer, and so forth, tomato hornworm. These first two levels of the plant health pyramid are purely a function of balanced chemistry. Has nothing to do with biology. You can achieve these first two levels of the plant health pyramid in a hydroponic situation. And I'd love to talk about them more, but considering that many of you have not heard me talk about this, I'm going to make this very brief. I'm going to give you the chemistry right now, so be prepared to take notes. Level 1, to achieve good photosynthesis in level 1, plants need to have adequate levels of 4 nutrients. Those 4 are magnesium, iron, manganese, and phosphorus. And I could also include nitrogen in that list. Nitrogen is also necessary, but we very seldom see nitrogen deficiencies. And within that list, I'd like to make one comment. For those, when you're doing soil analysis and tissue analysis, you are always getting the report that you have excessive iron. A soil analysis will show that you have excessive iron. Tissue analysis shows that you have excessive iron. And yet, when you put on an iron application, you get a tremendous crop response. Why? Because the iron that is showing up on the soil test and that is showing up in the tissue analysis is in what is called the oxidized form. It is not physiologically active. It's showing up in the plant, but the plant isn't actually utilizing it. So, almost universally, farmers believe that they have an excess of iron when in fact their plants are iron deficient, and they get a tremendous iron response. Level 2, the minerals that are needed at level 2 is magnesium, sulfur, and molybdenum. And I would add boron. Boron is not directly involved in the photosynthesis process, but the addition of boron gives us a much greater degree of resistance to this insect class. So those are of course, you can enhance this tremendously by working with biostimulants and by working with other tools to enhance overall plant health. But from a nutritional perspective, those nutrients are at the foundation of producing plants that have this level of resistance to these groups of insects. Then we move on to level 3. Level 3 is when plants begin forming elevated levels of lipids, plant fats, and oils. So if you give a beef animal more energy than it requires, it stores the surplus energy in the form of fat, right? Plants do exactly the same thing. When a plant is photosynthesizing so efficiently, so effectively, it has more energy than it requires that it can put into seeds or into root systems, it stores the surplus energy in the form of fats and oils. So this gets expressed in the field. We can actually see this visually when we look at a plant as a glossy, waxy sheen on the leaf surface. That waxy sheen on the leaf surface is an expression of high lipid concentration. So if we're doing forage production, for example, for dairy, beef, and so forth, the baseline level for lipids will be about 1.5 to 1.75% on a dry matter basis. You will never see lipids, fat content on forages go below that level because those lipids are needed to form the cell membranes inside the plant. But from that baseline, let's say the baseline is 2%, you can increase from that baseline all the way up to 4 to 6%, and in exceptional cases I've seen fat content as high as 6%, or excuse me, as high as 8%, which is extremely high fat content, high energy forages. So at this point, these plants now become resistant to, yes?
Question, does that hold true also for nut oils, seed oils, and essential oils?
So the question was, does this oil production idea also hold true for seed oils, such as for nuts and flax and et cetera, whenever we're producing, and essential oils? And the short answer is yes, it does. You can substantially increase the oil production capacity of almost any crop. So at this stage, these plants now become resistant to all of the airborne pathogens, both fungal and bacterial pathogens. So when we're talking about downy mildew, powdery mildew, late blight, early blight, bacterial speck, angular leaf spot, and so forth, these are all pathogens that land on the leaf surface and release an enzyme that is called a pectolytic enzyme that is designed to break down pectins in the cell membrane. When we have a strong layer of waxes and oils on the leaf surface, that serves as a barrier and as a shield to prevent the enzyme from degrading the cell membrane, and it effectively prevents an infection. Now, I said that level 1 and level 2 can happen based on chemistry. You cannot achieve level 3 in a hydroponic situation. In order to get to level 3, plants, you have to have really strong biology in the rhizosphere and in the root system. At level 3, plants must absorb a majority of their nutrition in the form of microbial metabolites. So I'll use nitrogen as an example. When a corn plant absorbs nitrate, the nitrate is absorbed from the root system, goes up into the leaves. And when it absorbs 80% of its total nitrogen requirement in the form of nitrate, it requires a total of 16% of its total photosynthetic energy every day, every 24-hour photoperiod, just to convert nitrate to ammonium to amino acids. So there's this tremendous energy drain that happens on the plant just from converting nitrate. The alternative is that the plant can absorb nitrogen in the form of urea or amino acids, particularly amino acids, from the soil microbial community, and immediately incorporate them into its own compounds. So it's the equivalent of the plant absorbing prefabricated compounds, because now it doesn't have to go through the synthesis process. Now, when it no longer has to go through the synthesis process is when it gets to the point where it has a surplus of energy. So surplus energy equals high fat concentrations and high oil concentrations. There's much more that I would love to talk about. This is also where we get into omega-3 versus 6 essential fatty acids and so forth. Just as a general guideline, when we talk about, to answer your earlier question, nut oils, essential oils, and so forth, we see that there's variability from crop to crop, but for many crops it's safe to say that we can increase the total fat content by a factor of about 2 to 3 times. It's a fairly consistent number. And then finally, at level 4, the top of the pyramid, plants begin producing much higher concentrations and substantially different ratios of all these plant secondary metabolites. So these are the alkaloids, the phenolic compounds, the phytoalexins, the terpenoids, all these compounds that plants produce as plant protectants to protect themselves from ultraviolet radiation, from insect attack, disease attack, overgrazing. At this point, they are resistant to just about everything. And in particular, they are resistant, very highly resistant to all the insects in the beetle family. So the Colorado potato beetle, June beetle, Japanese beetle, corn rootworm beetle, harlequin bug, marmorated stink bug, the list goes on and on. So, I'd love to talk more, but you can actually find more information about this plant health pyramid that we've put online on our website at advancingecoag.com if you want to look it up. I put together a second diagram. I know I'm speaking quickly, but I want to move through this fairly quickly. We put together this diagram to describe what we see happening with the interaction in soil and plant ecosystems that allows healthy plants to rapidly regenerate soil and build soil health. So, just to set a bit of context, there are three ecosystems which sequester carbon substantially faster than all others. The first is an early growth stage coniferous forest. Sequesters carbon extremely rapidly. The second is a perennial polyculture intensively managed rotationally grazed pasture. Sequesters carbon very rapidly. And the third is corn. Corn has the capacity to sequester a tremendous amount of carbon. in the 70s and 80s, there were a number of articles and even books that were written by leading agronomists of the day who described how, in their opinion, the fastest way to build soil organic matter was to grow corn. And today, if you speak with agronomists today, the general accepted idea is that growing corn is going to deplete soil organic matter. So what happened? What's the difference between 1970 and 2010? And the difference is in how the level of health of the corn crop and how we think about the corn plants. Also, genetic modification is a substantial contributing factor as well. So I want to describe what happens. Again, think of the context. Plants that are at 20% photosynthetic capacity versus plants that are 80% or that have 4 times more sugar in every day. That's what we've come to accept as common as the 15-20%. So step 1 on the biological cascade is plants that have full capacity photosynthesis and they're producing a large volume of sugars. They transmit those sugars out through the root system as root exudates. In the case of a corn plant, as much as 70 to 80% of the total sugar production every 24 hours during the framing period gets sent out through the root system as root exudates, a tremendous volume. That sugar in the root system triggers bacterial digestion. Now, if you think about it, what is sugar? Glucose is C6H12O6. There is no calcium, magnesium, zinc, manganese, copper. There are no minerals in sugar. And the bacteria need minerals to form their own bodies. So they will actually extract minerals from the soil mineral matrix and incorporate them into their own cells as they are feeding on this sugar supply. Then, as that bacterial population cycles and is grazed upon by protozoa, nematodes, and other organisms, it will release the nutrients that it absorbed from the rock substrate in the form of amino acid chelates, organic acid chelates, and fatty acid chelates. So that bacterial digestive process is called mineralization because it extracts minerals from the soil mineral matrix. Now, you have all of these free microbial metabolites in the rhizosphere. And that now leads to plants absorbing these microbial metabolites, these organic acids and amino acids, and now they have a surplus of energy. This is how you get to level 3 on the plant health pyramid. So when they have a surplus of energy, they begin storing higher levels of fats and oils. Those higher levels of fats and oils are now also being transmitted out through the root system. And now, when you have oils being transmitted out through the root system, that now triggers fungal digestion. Guess what? Bacteria can't digest oils. This is why historically we used to preserve meat by storing it in fat, because bacteria can't digest fat, but fungi can. So now we trigger really strong fungal digestive process. And the moment we have really strong fungal digestion of lipids results in the formation of stable humic substances that have a half-life of hundreds of years. So if we want to, this is the foundational idea, the concept behind the idea that growing really healthy plants can rapidly increase soil organic matter. We actually have data from farms that we've worked with. We have soil analysis data for a number of years in which we are documenting a 0.5 percentage point increase in organic matter year after year by growing corn on corn on corn. And it's not because we have a lot of residue left over in the field, because there is no residue, and there was no residue when we started. This is simply a function of growing an extremely healthy crop. So now, if I had to summarize all of this, I've just described for you the tremendous potential that plants have to grow really healthy plants and to regenerate soil health. And what do you as a farm manager need to do to achieve these kinds of results? It's really only one thing. The bottom of the pyramid and the first step in this cascade all begins with one piece, photosynthesis. You need to substantially increase a plant's photosynthetic volume so that it's producing a lot more sugars, and all the rest of this happens by itself. It's a natural cascade that takes place all by itself, and we just focus on the very first piece. So, this is why I am such a strong advocate and a strong fan of using foliar applications of nutrients that are timed at the right time. The Nectarine farmer that we work with had a very limited budget to work with. In fact, he borrowed all of the money that he used to put on the foliar applications that we recommended, and we don't have a choice except to produce an exceptional crop response. We don't have the luxury of time. We don't have the luxury of taking a year or 2 years and hoping to have a better crop next year. It needs to happen right now. And The only tool that I know of that can consistently produce those kinds of results and produce a big response right now is foliar applications. And this is why I am such a big fan. So I know that I've gone over my time. I will take time for 2 questions, and then if you have any additional questions, I'll look forward to seeing you in the consulting hall this afternoon. Yes?
This isn't a question, but we actually did that kind of by accident a couple of years ago. We didn't use foliar applications, but we got that cascade started, and we got 2.7% organic matter increase in 1 year.
Wow. So this is a comment of someone that actually produced this result accidentally, unintentionally, and produced an increase of soil organic matter by 2.7% in a single year. With corn. That is exceptional. All right. It looks like everyone is leaving, so thank you for coming. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll see you later this afternoon.
Thank you for listening to the Acres USA podcast, a podcast production of Acres USA. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres USA is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. And we're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their